with the same circular design with multiple engines. And let's see if I can skip ahead to some of the other tracks here. So if you saw this thing flying around, what would you think? If you're someone in the past and someone just jumped in this and took off and flew to the next town, just like the ancient text says, it'd be a great responsibility to use one of the flying machines. And yes, Dennis Love, yes, that's propeller driven, absolutely. This is why I read earlier from the text from ancient India that they had they were heating up the metal, using it with the mercury, some form of combustion that was creating the propulsion for them. So yes, and this is I was also showing the circular design of the ancient Vimanas and how they were made with different compartments. What was in those compartments? What was the actual mercury engine that was being used within that circular design? No way to tell. Was it a similar style engine as this guy's put propeller-driven engines inside of this circular craft? No way to tell. The ancient texts that were translated in 1923, they actually had literal propellers on the outside. Did they ever try putting those propellers on the inside? Hard to tell. But ultimately, this is a very interesting concept because we're bringing into the present a similar aeronautic design for flight that we see in the ancient past. So let me stop right here and we'll go to the next. So look, just check this out, guys. This is from the 1950s craft. You have up here at the top ancient Vimanas from ancient India and a flying machine of some sort from ancient Babylon. This is the circular fashion in both occasions from India to Babylon. And then we have one of the larger Vimanas here on the left-hand side that would have that same plane of circular fashion inside of it as depicted in the schematics above. But it's the same circular fashion to be outside this pilot in this experimental craft from the 1950s. Except when the ancient Vimanas that were called Pushpakas, these bigger ones, you would just, like a ziggurat, you just put them on top of each other and compound your lift. I'm not an engineer, but it seems very plausible to me. So plausible that the Air Force is trying to replicate these concepts. Just in case people are forgetting, as we talked about in series 1, or excuse me, in part 1 of the series, people are saying, yeah, but Sean, like that, I mean, are you sure you're not just extrapolating too much? Are you sure you're not just kind of, assuming too much of the ancients? I mean, they were just primitive people, right? They're just, why are they still carving on rocks?
We get it, I need all the ladies to take a stretch.
These are the same people that take the Tower of Babel. Do you believe that Bible or not? This is the question I would have for. We can't replicate the Tower of Babel today. Look at this picture on the screen. The tallest building in the world, the Burj Khalifa. Currently built. There's other tall ones under construction. But as of right now, the Tower of Babel is much, much taller than the tallest building we ever built so far. And this isn't truly even the best depiction of the Tower of Babel. It was, according to the Book of Jubilees, it was taller than 1.6 miles tall, which would be 3 times the So, just as a loving reminder to everybody, we can't act like these guys are just living things. That's the evolutionary indoctrinated learning that we've received from state-funded education. They want us to think that these people are just barely figuring out language. They were just living. So even though there's a ton of secular research and historical, anthropological, and paleontological, and archaeological evidence and information and lectures and books about all of these ancient cultures, in one hand they say these ancient cultures had all these features and benefits. On the other hand, they say they just crawled out of caves. In fact, if you research history, you'll see about 4,000 years ago, they're baffled because they can't figure out the etymology of languages and why it seemed to explode 4,000 years ago, because they won't acknowledge Genesis 11. And they also are baffled, which is willful self-denial in my opinion, because they won't actually acknowledge that there was extremely advanced civilizations. To me, this is what the History Channel's version of Ancient Aliens is trying to do. They're trying to come in now after 70, 80 years of public indoctrination to tell people came from monkeys, and that man's been around for 100,000 years, and oh, only about 10,000 years ago did we start figuring out how to make the wheel and how to actually sense to work. Didn't really get very good until so they come in with this lie, right? That's completely backwards from what the scriptures say. But in the last 10 to 15 years, they come in with this narrative fusing the alien concept in there and try to say, well, maybe they were more advanced, but they got that advancement from aliens. So they're still pushing a lie outside of the scriptural context. There are no aliens. There's no outer space. There's a firmament that was created over the earth that encapsulates us. And the Father, the Son of all things, and his angels, they live on layers of the firmament above our layer, above us. It's a very systematic, well-engineered, and very logical model of creation. So, as a result of our brains coming to this information, it seems outstanding, right? It seems sensational, as a lot of our antagonists like to say. It's hilarious. We do like hundreds of videos on the foundations of Scripture and the Gospel of the Kingdom and the Torah, but yet we're still. I do a couple of videos like this, and people still want to tell me that we're dealing in sensation. It's hilarious. But the idea here is in our modern minds, it can be difficult to look at this information and say, these guys, like we're way beyond even where we are as the average culture. Yes, we have indoor plumbing, we have air conditioners in our car, right? We have that, but the ancient people had their own versions of technology. And some of them far out exceed ours. This is one of them. They had flying machines. So yes, we have flying machines. Don't get me wrong. We have very sophisticated flying machines, but I challenge you that they had them much longer than we've had them, and they had them very early on in history. We're talking a couple hundred years after the flood of Noah, which is wild to think about, because what are we talking about now? We're talking about them having the architectural prowess and engineering and sophisticated intelligence to build a building that's bigger and stronger and more massive than we've ever constructed in modernity, as well as they had flying machines possibly flying around that building. So this is why, at the same time, you have Abraham. He's out there. One second, guys. Let's see if I can get this going. Okay, sorry. You have Abraham. He's out there living during the midst of all this stuff. The patriarchs that we read about in the Bible, Shem, Arphaxad, Selah, all those guys, Peleg, Eber. Do you think that this technology just went away by the time Moses showed up, a couple hundred years after Abraham? Do we think that that this stuff just went away? So we're gonna continue diving into the history of ancient Babylon in further series, and we're gonna have another episode on the past, because it's leading us into present day Babylon, and we're still building a strong foundation for all these concepts and ideas, so that when we get to the prophecy part about future Babylon, it all will be very, very clear, and we can understand why the scriptures speak as they do. That's the goal, is for clarity. we're continuing our series of investigating Babylon. We're actually going to go into part 5, where we're looking at the history, the archaeology, the world surrounding early Babylon, the Tower of Babel, and the city that was built as the first kingdom of Babylon. Now, as we've talked about before, that kingdom was still pervasive after the Tower of Babylon was destroyed, and that kingdom, many would suggest, is still around today in various forms. So we're actually going to be looking at a unique aspect of the ancient world, and we'll be looking at what is considered the home of the gods, right? And I do want to put the air quotes around the little g gods, because I don't think they're gods at all, right? But the ancient world they thought that their rulers were gods, and because their rulers had the ability to do some things that they couldn't usually, so they then attributed some sort of godlike status to them, and oftentimes would worship them as well. So we're going to be looking at what various cultures talked about as far as where did those rulers live. And that was because many of them did not, according to their ancient records, they did not live with the average person on the ground. So we're going to go look and see where they said they did live. I say we just jump right into this. What do you guys say? All right, we're going to investigate Babylon a little further, looking at the home of the gods. And even though I have Mount Olympus on the thumbnail, we're going to be looking at more than one culture and what they talked about. So guys, let's jump into, just as a quick refresher, many people may not realize that what we're doing is maybe your first time to see Kingdom Cast, or maybe your first time to see this particular series we're doing. So what we're doing is we're looking at Babylon of the past, and then we'll be doing series where we look on Babylon in the present, and then we'll be looking at future Babylon as foretold by prophecy. Now, even though many of the last 4 episodes already have all of the elements kind of built in, as far as the main focus of each video, we're segmenting it in past, present, future. So hopefully it'll be a blessing to you, give you a great, thorough, and contextual, well-rounded view of this topic that is all throughout the scriptures. So let's keep going. Here is Greece. So guys, Greece, as we talked about before, after the Tower of Babel was destroyed and the people dispersed back to their own lands, speaking new languages now, Greece is one of the major empires that arose from those new languages, if you will. Mount Olympus was what they called the home of the gods. Now, even though historians will try to tell you that the ancient Greeks revered or spoke of Mount Olympus as a physical mountain, and then later in history talked about it being a non-physical mountain of more of a sky dwelling, I think I'm going to put forward some things tonight to show you that they always revered it as a sky dwelling. It's only with reductionist history later on, whereas we had developed a heliocentric view instead of a biblical cosmological view, have modern day secular historians tried to re-explain, if you will, the idea of what the ancient Greeks called Mount Olympus. So let's look at it. This is from the Iliad. This is an ancient poet from ancient Greece. His name was Homer, around the 7th century BC. He spoke, and the ox-eyed lady Hera was seized with fear and sat down in silence, curbing her heart. Then troubled were the gods of heaven throughout this palace of Zeus, and among them Hephaestus, the famed craftsman, was first to speak, doing pleasure to his dear mother, white-armed Hera. Surely this will be sorry work. That is no longer bearable if you two are to wrangle thus for mortal sakes and set the gods in tumult. Neither will there be any joy in the excellent feast, since worse things prevail. And I give counsel to my mother, wise though she be herself, to do pleasure to our dear father Zeus, that the father upbraid her not again and bring confusion upon our feast. So this is just a small example of in the mindset of someone that it was a 7th century, that's what historians conclude is approximately 7th century BC for Homer. This was his mindset. This is, even though this is just a book that he wrote, okay? This isn't, I'm not saying that these events are actually true. It doesn't matter. In his book that he wrote, he has a consistent description of where the gods were, the gods of ancient Greece. They were the quote unquote gods of heaven. So let's, we'll just keep going here. This is from 6 centuries later in the 1st century BC. Okay, so just a few years before the time of Yeshua walking the earth. This is from the book Aeneid. It's from the collection of Latin poems called the Aeneid, and this is actually book 10. And it's from Virgil, is what he's generically referred to in history, but his official name is Publius Virgilius Maro. Yeah, that's it. So this is what he has to say about the ancient gods in his book, his epic poems in Latin. He says, meanwhile, Olympus, seat of sovereign sway, through wide its portals, and in conclave fair the sire. By the way, guys, the word conclave, that means in secret meeting. Okay, so he says, and in conclave fair the sire, which is the word for authority of the gods and king of all mankind, Zeus, he summoned the immortals to his starry court. It's interesting. Whence high enthroned the spreading earth he views. It's very interesting. And to Crea's camp and Latium's fierce array, beneath the double-gated dome, the gods were sitting. Beneath the double-gated dome. It's pretty interesting, huh? Beneath the double-gated dome. West Blaze, this is not the show you're waiting for. Sorry to disappoint you, brother. We've got several more episodes before the show you're waiting for. But who knows? Maybe you'll find this one entertaining as well. So, guys, this is the ancient mindset of 1st century BC Greek or Latin. He's actually from Rome. He's the Latin poet. He spoke of the ancient Greek gods sitting beneath the double-gated dome in a starry court, enthroned high above the earth, so that spreading earth he views. So he's being able to view the spreading earth below him. It's a very interesting description. Let's keep going. This is from Josephus, from the Antiquity of the Jews. And Sybil also makes mentions of this tower. This is actually him recanting some details of the Tower of Babel. And we actually looked at this particular quote a couple episodes ago when we were going over the post-Nephilim, the post-flood Nephilim. And so he says in Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 4, verse 3, the Sybil also makes mention of this tower and the confusion of the language when she says this: when all men were of one language, some of them built a high tower, as if they would thereby ascend up to heaven. But the gods sent storms of wind and overthrew the tower and gave everyone his peculiar language. And for this reason, it was that the city was called Babylon. But as to the plan of Shinar and the country of Babylonia, Hestius mentions it when he says this: such of the priests as were saved took the sacred vessels of Jupiter in Ialius and came to Shinar of Babylonia. So the reason I wanted to point that out as a reminder is that they were worshiping Jupiter at the Tower of Babel. This was Jupiter. He's the great god of sky and thunder and the king of the gods in ancient Rome, religion and mythology. He's the chief deity of the Roman state religion throughout the Republic and imperial eras. In Roman mythology, he negotiates stuff. It's not relevant to what I'm trying to get to. The second king of Rome, to establish principles of Rome religion such as offerings and sacrifices. And it says the Romans regarded Jupiter as the equivalent of the Greek Zeus. So as the Romans took over and power throughout the kingdom, that a kingdom the Greeks used to have power over, they brought in their words and their names for what the Greeks used to call these gods. So the idea of Zeus that we just read about from the Greek poets before the time of Yeshua, they're referred to as Jupiter by the Romans. And this is something that we covered a little bit last time from the Flying Machines episode, or part 4. As you can remember, just as a quick reminder, we have the Vajra and the hand of Zeus, which, according to the ancient Indians, the Vajra was something that controlled flying machines. All right, let's move to Germania, if I could. So we're going to be talking about Asgard, but a lot of you, and before you fill up the comments saying Asgard was the Norse. Yes, I understand that. The region which they lived, as well as many other people that held the same belief set as the Norse, or quote unquote the Vikings, they lived in a realm, in a region of what we consider Africa today that was referred to as Germania back in the day, during the time of the Romans. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because there was more than one people group that held this belief of Odin. And Odin was a Norse god of both the Norse, the Germanic people, the Dutch, and even the Celtic peoples. Between the ancient Norse, the Germans, the Gauls, and the Greeks, Odin is linked to Mercury, who is also Hermes to the Greeks. Mercury was a Roman name, Hermes was the Greek name, and also Mars among the Romans as well. The name Mercury is possibly related, according to historians, to the Latin word merx, which means merchandise or merchant or commerce. And mercari is a derivative of Mercury, which means to trade. And merces is a derivative of that Greek, of that word, that Roman word, Latin word, I should say, which means wages. Another possible connection that's been researched is the Proto-Indo-European root merger for boundary and border. In Old English, Mark, also in Old Norse, his name is called Mark. In the Latin, it's Margot. And by analogy of the Greek, he's considered the keeper of the boundaries, referring to his role as a bridge between the upper and lower worlds. So what am I talking about? Many people aren't aware of Norse mythology and what they talked about. We're going to get to some diagrams and pictures in just a minute. But real quick, the Roman historian Tacitus, he was also a politician in the 1st century, he equates Odin to the Roman god Mercury, and specifically for these reasons. In addition to being a trickster and a magician, they both had this this trait where they would disguise themselves and be wanderers to interact with mankind. Hopefully some of this is striking scriptural ideas to you right now. So let's look at in a modern day setting. This is the picture on the right hand side from a Marvel movie depicting Thor and his father Odin. And in this movie, he has the raven on his shoulder. He's the king of Asgard, and he has the trident, which is the Vajra, in his hand. So an old Norse theonym, which is just how they would say stuff. It has different Germanic cognates and how they would use their words. In the Old Saxon and the Old English, he was not called Odin; he's called Woden. This is actually, many people don't realize this. This is actually where we get the word Wednesday. The Old High German, he's called Wotan, and the Old Dutch would be Wodan. All derived from the reconstructed Proto-Germanic masculine theonym, which is Wodanaz or Wudanaz. Translates to Lord of Frenzy or Leader of the Possessed. Also translates to delirious or raging or a master of. And so this is why Mercury and Mars are a good fit for their character attributes that were ascribed to them. He's got the Vajra, guys. He's got the trident in his hand. He was the king over Asgard, home of the gods, that supposedly you could only get to from a rainbow bridge. Where are rainbows? Where do rainbows happen? So this is the Asgardian, or I should say that the Norse 9-realm cosmology. They believed there were 9 different positions where life lived, and that the gods, whom Odin and Thor were rulers of all the gods, that they lived in Asgard, which, as you can see in their cosmology, was at the top of the celestial tree. And this tree was considered to fill up the whole world, basically. This was their cosmological ideal. So this is why in ancient depictions, the city where Odin and Thor lived, that you only got to from a rainbow bridge, was in the clouds at the very top of this extremely large tree. As you can see the depiction here, where it's connected to the tree at the top of it. An entire city with mountains at the top of a big tree that filled up the world. But what we see in modern day depictions of Asgard through modern movies is they've changed the cosmology. So now it's a floating city in outer space with stars around it, connected by this magical rainbow bridge. That's a literal structure with various colors in it, like a bridge. It's like a crystalline structure, but it's like a magical. It connects to something called the Bifrost, which this guy named Heimdall controls, and you can't. You don't follow a rainbow to get to Asgard. You actually are taken up in a rainbow-colored Bifrost, which is like a teleportation concept, like Star Trek. Okay, so it's a very different application of this ancient cosmology and how a god of Asgard, for their mythology, would actually get to this city of Asgard. Okay, and so this is the Bifrost machine. Take very careful note of that. We're going to be talking about this type of architecture in the future. Here is, in modern day depiction, this is, even though the cosmology is different, they sure did get a lot of things right once they got to the actual place of Asgard. And this is his throne room, which is where Odin sits. course, he's got the trident in his hand, which is the Vajra. But if you look carefully, and if you remember our episode from last week where we talked about the ancient flying machines, this is the same, literally the same shape as the flying boat of Ra from Egypt, who was the head patron god of Egypt. You also have the two birds. Ra was considered a hawk-headed god, likened unto manifesting himself as a bird on occasion to do different things. Then you also have the two snakes. Now, in Norse mythology, the two snakes, this was supposedly connected to a brother of Thor. So Odin had, various children, and apparently one of his children, they had to sell a bunch of gold to get their brother, but he somehow turned into a snake. I mean, it's all very, very much mythical concepts, but the idea is that this is what's represented here. But what's unique to the ancient world is that the serpent was always associated with these patron characters, these head characters over all the gods. So just like, Vishnu and Shiva, the snake is always present, just like, Egyptian hieroglyphs you see with Ra and Osiris, the snake's present. So this is always something that was everywhere. There's the serpent. As well as we're actually going to come back to these in future episodes. I just want to tease these ideas, take quick note of those. But as their actual cosmology, what they believed the location of these gods and where they lived was at the top of this tree that pretty much encompassed the world and all the livable 9 areas of the world. And they were at the top of this tree. So let's look at some scriptures here where we see a very similar example, okay? Now, even though this is a vision or it's actually a dream, I guess, that Daniel is going to be sharing with Nebuchadnezzar about a tree that reaches to the sky and fills up the world. It's about how Daniel interprets and explains the symbolism of the tree is what I want everyone to take note of, because it's going to apply when it comes to the idea of the rulers of the gods and how they would inhabit a place to live in, and what the ancient world viewed. So this is from a Hebrew mindset speaking to a Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar, at approximately the 5th, 6th century BC. And they're going to have the same understanding of what a big tree would mean pertaining to a ruler of a vast empire or a lot of peoples. So let's look at it. Daniel chapter 4, 10 through 7. Now these were the visions of my mind as I lay in my bed. I was looking, and behold, there was a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew large and became strong, and its heights reached to the sky, and it was visible to the end of the whole world. That's interesting, right? How could that happen on a ball earth? But I digress. Let's keep going. Its foliage was beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the sky dwelt in its branches. All the living creatures fed themselves from it. I was looking in the visions in my mind as I lay on my bed, and behold, an angelic watcher, a holy one, descended from heaven. He shouted out and spoke as follows: Chop down the tree, cut off its branches, strip off its foliage, and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it, and the birds from its branches. Yet leave the stump with its roots in the ground, with the band of iron and bronze around it in the new grass of the field. And let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him share with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. This sentence is by the decree of the angelic watchers, and the decision is the command of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind, and bestows it on whom he wishes, and sets it over the lowliest of men. So that is interesting, guys, right? We have a moment here where most of us already know the story. This is after this, Nebuchadnezzar, he actually goes what seems to be like mentally insane. For 7 years, it turns into the behavior of a beast, where he's just, eating the grass of the field, and he doesn't have his right mind. Many people believe that Daniel kind of took over the kingdom at this time during these years where the king was incapacitated and wasn't mentally fit. And but the analogy that's being drawn to Nebuchadnezzar's reign over Babylon and all the kingdoms, all the provinces, the 127 provinces that he ruled, which were other countries and people groups, is the analogous to this big tree that fills up the world, and everyone's participating in this big tree. So the tree analogy itself, and the height of the tree being up to the sky, it's not a literal tree in this metaphor. it represents the power that was associated with this particular king. Some people may be asking, so Sean, are you saying that the ancient Greek gods and the ancient Norse gods, which I say are the same, I try to show you the same thing, same people. Are you trying to say that they didn't actually have a large place in the sky that they lived? And that's not what the ancient people thought. I thought that's what you opened up explaining, right? What are you saying? I'm trying to give you the idea that there was accepted in the ancient world, because we're going to see this earlier, was the idea that the gods lived in the sky. I've got more to show you, a lot more. But that the analogy, the metaphor, if you will, of how their power, influence, and their authority, if they reached a certain level, would be like a great mountain that reached into the sky, or like a tree that reached into the sky. Is there evidence that they actually had some place that they lived in the sky? Like the ancient poets talked about being the gods of heaven? Yes. But I'm trying to give you a different perspective on how people spoke about authority over lots of different regions of the earth and how it was related back to kings or rulers. Remember, I told you we're going to be looking at the rulers of these ancient kingdoms and what the average person thought of them hopefully compared to, a scriptural understanding as well. So I've got it. I'm trying to walk the line, if I can, by explaining to you two different concepts, because they're all interconnected anyway. All of the cultures spoke about the gods that lived in the sky. I want to make it very clear, we're not talking. We've explained biblical cosmology on this Kingdom Cast for 6 months now. They did not believe that these gods lived above the firmament. When they would talk about the gods of heaven, they believed they were talking about in the sky. At the same time, a great ruler could be metaphorically referred to as someone at the top of the greatest mountain, or in a tree that fills up the whole world, living at the top of a tree, right? Is a great ruler living in a big tree house? No. But the point is, it's their reach extends to all the world because of their authority. So there's a metaphor at play here between a person's authority and a person's actual living space. Okay? I'm just trying to draw that distinction real quick. All right, let's keep going. Here in Ezekiel chapter 31, 1-7, this is the Father explaining through the prophet Ezekiel to Pharaoh of Egypt during the days of Ezekiel that Pharaoh should be very, very afraid, because what happened to Assyria is going to happen to Pharaoh. So we're going to look at the descriptions, because he's actually going to talk about some unique concepts about the metaphor, the analogies of the Assyrian kingdom. And this is the same kingdom, guys, that came in and took out the northern 10 tribes of Israel. Okay? About the 7th century, about 720 BC. Let's look at it real quick. In the 11th year, in the 3rd month, on the 1st of the month, the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, say to the Pharaoh king of Egypt and to his hordes, whom are you like in your greatness? Behold, Assyria was a cedar in Lebanon, with beautiful branches and a forest shade, and very high, and its top was among the clouds. The waters made it grow, the deep made it high. With its rivers it continually extended all around in planting place, and sending out its channels to all the trees of the field. Therefore its height was loftier than all the trees of the field, and its boughs became many, and its branches long, because of the many waters as it spread them out. All the birds of the heaven nested in its boughs, and under its branches all the beasts of the field gave birth, and all great nations lived under its shade. So it was beautiful in its greatness, and in the length of its branches, for all of its roots extended to many waters. This is talking about the reach of the kingdom of Assyria to all the nations that it ruled. The cedars in God's garden could not match it. The cypresses could not compare with its boughs. The plane trees could not match its branches. No tree in God's garden could compare with it in its beauty. I made it beautiful with the multitude of its branches, and all the trees of Eden, which were in the garden of God, were jealous of it. And by the way, guys, Ezekiel uses the term garden of God to mean literally the area of Israel between the Euphrates and the Nile. This is the area promised to Abraham. A lot of people get really confused by that terminology. We're not literally talking about the Garden of Eden. He's not talking about the Garden of Eden. The land of Eden, where the garden was placed, is where the promised land that's promised Abraham between the Euphrates and the Nile. Remember, Assyria is on the other side of the Euphrates. So geographically, he's right to compare the two. All right, let me just get back to it real quick. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, because it is high in stature and has set its top among the clouds, and its heart is haughty in its loftiness, therefore I will give it into the hand of the despot of the nations. He will thoroughly deal with it. According to its wickedness, I have driven it away. Alien tyrants of the nation have cut it down and left it. On the mountains and in all the valleys, its branches have fallen, and its boughs have been broken in all the ravines of the land. All the people of the earth have gone down to its shade and left it. On its ruins, all the birds of the heavens will dwell, and all the beasts of the field will be on its fallen branches, so that all the trees by the waters may not be exalted in their stature, nor set their top among the clouds, nor their well-watered mighty ones stand erect in their height. For they have all been given over to death, to the earth, beneath, among the sons of men, with those who go down to the pit. Thus, says the Lord God, on the day when it went down to Sheol, I caused lamentations. I closed the deep over it and held back its rivers. Its many waters were stopped up, and I made Lebanon mourn for it. All the trees of the field wilted on account of it. I made the nations quake at the sound of its fall when I made it go down to Sheol, with those who go down to the pit, and all the well-watered trees of Eden. The choicest and best of Lebanon were comforted in the earth beneath.
My mood was messed up, so I'm done. I'm not streaming no more.